Hey fellow believers, I'm Dr. Medrano. If you like this video, hit the like button and subscribe. And now it's time to pick up your Bible. Today's Bible study is called I Am Broken. Fix me. You know the saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it? I think God's version is, if it's broken, I'll fix it. So when you think about it, admitting to God, I am broken, and then telling him, fix me, I mean, there's so much power in that. And that's today's theme. We'll be reading mostly out of the book of 1 Samuel chapter 1. So let's talk inspo. Last night, before I went to bed, I was pacing in my room, talking to God, praying to him as judge. If you haven't read Robert Henderson's Courts of Heaven, you need to. So, I was praying to God as judge and asking him to issue me a divorce decree from all the things that have been stalling his plans for me, such as anxious feelings, depression, strained relationships, etc. I was declaring in my bedroom, God, as judge, you must see that these negative things are preventing me from reaching my full potential as your servant. I mean, it didn't sound that formal, but that's essentially what I was praying. And I kept asking the Holy Spirit to minister to me and help me pray before the court. After denouncing and evicting everything that Satan had wanted me to hold on to so that he might keep me in bondage, I started telling God as Father and as judge that I needed him. I must have said it like 40 times. I just kept repeating it over and over and over again. And then I switched to, I can't do this without you. I surrender. All of this out loud, mind you. That's important, so Satan can hear it too. I surrendered specific things. And then I asked God to seal his judgments of these things that have been tormenting me. This reminds me of one of my favorite characters in the Bible, Hannah. I love the story of Hannah. She doesn't get much, but her story is so incredibly relatable. But before we study, let's get some backstory on the book of 1 Samuel, which is where we'll be reading out of today. What and who is going on during this time? So, when we talk about 1 Samuel, this book and this moment in time takes place around 1000 BC. This was at the end of what the Bible refers to as the period of the Judges. Prior to the period of the Judges, Moses and Joshua were in leadership role and both served very well. Moses first, and then Joshua took over after Moses passed away. Now, after Joshua, the Israelites, remember, I'm not talking about northern Israel because the split kingdom hasn't happened yet. Here, when I say Israelites, I mean all of them before they split into northern Israel and southern Judah. I'm talking about all of them as a collective, all of the Israelites. Anyways, after Joshua passed, the Israelites fell into an atrocious cycle, and they could not get out of it. In that cycle, the Israelites first would fall into sin. I would say really, not fall, jump is more like it. Second, as he often does with his people when they disobey, God would get angry. You know, how could you do this kind of mentality? Third, he would allow them to be oppressed by their enemies. Fourth, as believers often do, right, including us, when the chips are down and they hit rock bottom, the Israelites would get desperate and cry out to God for help. So, fifth, God would send a judge. In Hebrew, a shofet, which means someone that governs and vindicates. This judge was less of a courtroom judge and more of a fierce, charismatic leader that was sent to walk them through repentance and back into salvation and into communion with God. And so, sixth, for a bit, they would experience true, genuine peace and everything would be good. But then the judge would die, as humans do. And without a shofet to lead them, a judge, and hold them accountable, the Israelites would jump back into sin and idolatry and start the whole process again. I know, try not to judge them. Laugh out loud. See what I did there? Anyways, Eli was the final judge during this period. He was actually more like a major prophet, and he resided at the tabernacle in Shiloh. The tabernacle at this point in time was located in Shiloh. It actually had already been there for over 200 years during all the period of the judges. And it was established there by Joshua after the God-appointed conquest of Canaan. Shiloh, in Joshua's opinion, the reason why he chose Shiloh to put the tabernacle is because Joshua believed that it was centrally located for the Israelites. And it was. It was in the hill country city in the upper east side of Ephraim, which is literally like right above Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is right on the northern edge of what later would be southern Judah. It's basically almost right on the border of Judah and Israel in the future, right? So it literally was right in the middle of this huge united kingdom, all right? But also, Shiloh was a defensible city, one that Joshua was confident that the Israelites could protect from God's enemies. So let's get started. We have a little bit of backstory. We're going to begin by reading chapter 1, Samuel, right? In 1 Samuel chapter 1, and we're going to start with verses 1 and 2. Here we go. There was a certain man from Rathaim, a Zuphite from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. He had 2 wives. One was called Hannah, and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. So we start off with Elkanah, the husband. He has not 1, but 2 wives. Back then, this was socially, not necessarily spiritually, acceptable. It was socially acceptable because in order to ensure an heir, if your first wife wasn't able to conceive or give you a son, then a second wife likely could. So his 2 wives are Hannah and Peninnah. Now Hannah was infertile. She was unable to conceive. And so he took Peninnah as a second wife, and she was able to have children. Let's read on verse 3. Year after year, this man went up, talking about Elkanah still. Year after year, this man went up from his town to worship and sacrifice to the Lord Almighty at Shiloh, where Hophni and Phinehas, the 2 sons of Eli, were priests of the Lord. So we learn here that Elkanah was a devout follower of the Lord. How do we know? Because 3 times a year, the Israelite men were called to attend the religious feast at the tabernacle in Shiloh. And so this is what's happening here. Elkanah is traveling faithfully to the Lord, to the Shiloh tabernacle, to worship and sacrifice as dictated by Jewish law. Here we also learn that Eli, the final judge / prophet, was also the high priest of the Shiloh tabernacle, and his 2 sons served alongside him. Let's keep going. Verses 4 through 5. Here's where the story gets really interesting. Verse 4. Whenever the day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. Verse 5. But to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, and the Lord had closed her womb. This is interesting because up until now, we might be feeling slightly jealous on Hannah's behalf of Peninnah's relationship with Elkanah. We might be feeling like, what the heck? Is this like low-key cheating, or is it high-key cheating, right? He literally has another wife that obviously has been able to give him sons and daughters, it says. But here, we get a glimpse of Elkanah's heart. he seems to favor Hannah, even though her womb was closed. I don't read it like he just felt sorry for her. I don't see that as necessarily being true. All right. I think of course he did feel sorry for her, but I think also I read it like it's saying that Elkanah loves Hannah more in spite of her not being able to give him children. And here's something even more interesting. Verse 5 ends with, and the Lord had closed her womb. Like, wait, what? God did this to her? Yes, God is the author of all life. I mean, come on, that's a hard pill to swallow. Why would God make her barren? That's basically what it's saying, that he did this to her. Why would he want her to suffer? Why would he want anyone to suffer? Why would you allow for children to die of cancer or to go hungry? That is a dangerous game to play, friendo. The truth is that God can turn any negative into something for his glory, which by definition is in our best eternal interest. Even if in the natural we don't see it that way, in the eternal state, in the spiritual realm, not in the natural realm, but in the spiritual realm, it is going to serve our best interest because it's giving glory to God. Anything negative, he could do that. But we don't often see it that way in the natural. It's hard to deny what we see and what we hear here in the natural realm. But that's what faith is about. It's about looking past the natural and holding on to the promises of God and knowing that those promises are in his word, in the Bible, right? This is literally God's words. It's God, the Bible, right? And holding on to those words, holding on to those promises and believing that whatever he says he's going to do, he's going to do. When he says it, that's it. It's going to happen. That's the tough part, is actually believing that, is having that inner felt confidence that we talked about in a previous video. However, most of the atrocious acts and experiences we suffer through, on a day-to-day basis, are just a plain old result of someone's sin, either ours or someone else's. God is the author of all life, but he also gave you free will. He wanted you to choose to enter into covenant, into relationship with him. He wants you to choose to go to him, to seek him, to pursue him, to be on fire for him. He doesn't want to force it, right? So that's the fine line there. And, maybe we should do a separate video on that, on free will versus, God's plan for our lives. But let's keep reading. Verse 6. It says, and because the Lord had closed her womb, her rival, Peninnah, kept provoking her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. I'm going to stop there. I know that's in the middle of verse 7, but I want to stop there really quick. My New International Version translation notes are so good, so I'm just going to read them out loud to you. All right. In verse 6, we see that Hannah had been unable to conceive children. And in Old Testament times, a childless woman was considered essentially a failure. Her barrenness was a social embarrassment for her husband and for herself. It literally brought shame. Even though it's not something she could help, it literally brought shame on her and her husband. Children, and the reason why is because children were a very important part of the society's economic structure. They were a source of labor for the family, and it was their duty later on in life, once their parents, got old, it was their duty to care for their parents in their old age. If a wife could not bear children, here talking about Hannah, she was often obligated by ancient Middle Eastern custom. Again, this is the social tradition, not the spiritual justification, the social justification. She was often obligated as a barren wife by ancient Middle Eastern custom to give one of her servant girls to her husband to bear children for her. Although Elkanah could have left Hannah which many husbands did back then, just as they do now, right? Although Elkanah could have left Hannah, a husband was permitted to divorce a barren wife. He remained lovingly devoted to her despite social criticism and his rights under civil law. So that's saying a lot right there. All right. In addition to whatever social stigma and personal shame Hannah was feeling, Peninnah wasn't making her feel any better. Peninnah was literally taunting her, verse 6 says. And gross, Peninnah, like, that's such an ugly name. She's like the original mean girl. Anyways, let's keep going. Verse 7. It says, this went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her till she wept and would not eat. Oh my gosh, this is awful. We see a broken woman in despair. You know, oftentimes people are struggling in their despair, and it's hard to justify God's timing. But we have to remember that as a believing family, we need to be able to offer our love and support to help them remain steadfast in their faith. Speaking of broken women, especially broken women in desperation, can we just turn to Matthew 9 really quick? I want to read a few verses out of there. We're going to go to a broken woman that I believe could probably relate to Hannah. All right, so we're going to go to Matthew chapter 9. We know this woman. Actually, this is the woman with the issue of blood. So let's read Matthew 9, verses 20 through 22. 20 through 22. Here we go. Just then, a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him, talking about Jesus, came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. 21. She said to herself, if I only touch his cloak, I will be healed. 22. Jesus turned and saw her. Take heart, daughter, he said. Your faith has healed you. And the woman was healed from that moment. I want you to listen really quick to Charles Spurgeon. I don't know if you guys know who Charles Spurgeon is, but he's by a landslide, one of my favorite, by a landslide, he is my favorite preacher / minister. And he literally has commentaries that are available online. You can literally, it's called like the Spurgeon, I think it's called the Kingdom Library actually. But it's a library where you can look up by scripture a whole sermon that he did. And he's been dead for a very long time. This guy existed in the late 1800s, right? And so he's been dead for a long time. So the writing of it is just, it's a little like, it can be, he's a very intellectual speaker, I would say, but oh my gosh, there's so much insight, and he'll literally just take it like 1 or 2 verses. He won't do more than that. And he will break it down for you. He's so good. Anyways, speaking about this woman with the issue of blood, Charles Spurgeon's commentary on these verses, I want you to listen to how he explains this. He says that the woman's faith is commended by our Lord. Her faith made her whole. Her faith is to be commended because it outlived a long season of discouragement. That's what Charles Spurgeon is saying. And he goes on to say that she had been 12 years afflicted. 12 years, you all. Think of that. Think of where you were 12 years ago, and think if you have been in suffering or in pain. Maybe you have been, of the struggle that comes with that, Patience had indeed had its perfect work in her. I want you to listen to that again. Charles Spurgeon said this, not me. Patience had indeed had its perfect work in her. But she believed in Christ for a cure, and the cure came to her. So will it be with everyone who simply believes in Jesus, including Hannah, right? Especially Hannah. Well, not especially, but including Hannah. So let's go back. We're going to go back to 1 Samuel, and I want to keep reading. We were on verse 8. Here we go. Elkanah, her husband, would say to her, Hannah, why are you crying? Why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Sorry. Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? So this is interesting. Elkanah attempts, like most husbands, to comfort his wife. However, he fails. Also, like most husbands. Hannah knew her husband loved her, but it didn't offer any comfort to her. You know, and he's even saying it like, don't I mean more to you than like 10 sons? Like, why are you crying about not being able to have kids? Like, you got me. Like, come on. Right? And so, I mean, he loved her and he tried to comfort her, I think, in the best way that he could, but it didn't help her situation. She was at her breaking point, you know, especially considering that Peninnah at the same time is taking jabs at her. Her self-confidence is taking a steep decline. But on the flip side, it can also be said that rather than allowing ourselves to fall deeper into despair, we should enjoy the relationships that God has provided for us and trade some of our despair for hope, right? So, I mean, also it can be seen that Elkanah, you know, was being genuine. Obviously, he loves her. He was being genuine, and that maybe she should have tried to, you know, jump on that bandwagon with him and trade in some of her depression for hope. Let's see what she does. Verse 9. Let's go to verse 9. Once when they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, so in other words, they're out of town, right? They're not at home. They're out of town in Shiloh at the tabernacle. Once when they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli the priest was sitting on a chair by the doorpost of the Lord's temple. Verse 10. In bitterness of soul, Hannah wept much and prayed to the Lord. Verse 11. And she made a vow, saying, O Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. Let me go back and explain this, okay? So verse 9, we know that they're at the tabernacle. They're out of town. They're during one of the celebrations, no doubt, right? The celebrations that took place where they were commanded to go, the Israelites were commanded to go and worship at the tabernacle in Shiloh. So they're over there worshiping. And it says, verse 10, in bitterness of soul, Hannah wept much and prayed to the Lord. Now, Hannah could stay stuck, but instead, she prays. In her brokenness and desperation, she prays. You know, this is a powerful space, a space where you are broken and desperate. Consider the Canaanite woman that asked Jesus for healing. You know, let's find her. Let's find her in the Word. Turn to Matthew. We're going to go to Matthew chapter 15. Matthew chapter 15, and we're going to go to verse 22. Here we go. This is where Jesus sends a demon out of a girl. This is en route. Jesus is en route, okay? He's en route somewhere. Look, let's see. Verse 22. I'm in Matthew 15, verse 22. Here we go. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him, talking about Jesus. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him, crying out, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is suffering terribly from demon possession. Stop right there. This woman, let me just tell you, let me explain. This woman was not a Gentile. but she was in Gentile territory. Jesus is passing through Gentile territory because he was there on a mission to minister specifically to Gentiles during this moment. And she's not a Gentile. So she is not his mission, is what I'm trying to say right now. The woman appears to be, though, in the same powerful space that Hannah was in, a space where she was broken and desperate, right? For her demon-possessed daughter to be delivered. That's why she's broken and desperate. Hannah was broken and desperate because she was barren. And this Canaanite woman is broken and desperate because she's desperate for her child to feel well again and to be delivered, right? I mean, it's the same. Let's, I'll read it to you again. In verse 10 of 1 Samuel chapter 1, look at the language. It's the same. In bitterness of soul, Hannah wept much and prayed to the Lord. And she made a vow, saying, O Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me and not forget your servant, but give her a son. Same thing here. Look upon your servant's misery. Now look, here, again, Matthew chapter 15, verse 22. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to me, crying out, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. Have mercy on me. It's the same thing. They're desperate. They're broken, right? There's no other place for them to go. This is their rock bottom. Okay. Verse 23. Let's keep going. Matthew 15, verse 23. Jesus did not answer a word. He seems to have stepped back and maybe pondered a little bit. He's pondering here. So his disciples came to him and urged him, send her away, for she keeps crying out after us. Notice that Jesus is pausing for a moment. He hasn't replied to her yet, but his disciples are being rude. It's easy to get caught up sometimes in spiritual tasks. Like I said, they were on a mission there to minister, right? But they were on a mission to minister to the Gentiles, and she's not a Gentile, and they know that, the disciples. And so they're like, girl, get away. It's not your turn right now. And so they tell Jesus, send her away. She keeps bothering us. Just send her away, right? But you have to realize that you can't be such a legalist when it comes to ministry that you miss the opportunity to minister to those that are most in need around us. Let's keep going. Verse 24. He answered, this is Jesus again. Now Jesus is answering her. I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. So this is where he is explicitly stating, and this would make sense to the Jews that were there, but this is where he's explicitly stating, I'm not here for you. I'm here for Gentiles. I'm here for a specific reason. I have an assignment, right? Verse 25, let's see how she responds. The woman came and knelt before him. Lord, help me, she said. So if it wasn't communicated already, she's getting more desperate. She is coming to him as if he's the only answer, because he is the only answer, and she recognizes that. Let's see how he responds. Jesus replied, it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs. You're kind of like, wait, what? It's not right. What? Okay, look, check this out. Let me read this to you really quick. In my NIV translation notes, it says dog, because he calls her a dog. He's comparing her to a dog. He doesn't call her a dog. He compares her to a dog. He says, it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs. In other words, I'm not going to take what was meant for Gentiles and give it to you. Dog was a term the Jews commonly applied to Gentiles because the Jews considered these pagan people no more likely than dogs to receive God's blessing. Jesus was not degrading the woman by using this term. He was reflecting the Jews' attitude so as to contrast it with his own. The woman did not argue. Instead, she uses Jesus' choice of words. She agreed to be considered a dog as long as she could receive God's blessing. Look, watch. It's going to come into play right now.
The woman came and knelt before him. Lord, help me, she said. Verse 26, he replied, it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs. Verse 27, look at what she replies. This is a smart woman. Yes, Lord, she said, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. Oof.
Again, even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. So, ironically, many Jews would lose God's blessing and salvation because they rejected Jesus. And many Gentiles would find salvation because they recognized and accepted him. This woman did not argue. Instead, she uses his words and she comes into agreement with him to be considered a dog as long as she could still just have the crumbs that fall from his table. Then Jesus answered, verse 28, Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted. And her daughter was healed from that very hour. I mean, you all, what kind of brokenness and desperation was that? And look what she received from it. And that's the point, is I am broken, fix me. You go to the correct source to get fixed, and you're going to get fixed. But first, you have to have a problem, and you have to admit that you have a problem. You have to be willing to go in that space of brokenness and desperation and surrender and admit, you know what? I don't deserve this. I think that's what's so beautiful about this woman. And I think that's what the metaphor is that we're supposed to take away from it, is that we don't deserve it. We are like dogs just begging for crumbs that fall from our master's table. I mean, that's the mentality that we should have, you know, as followers of Christ, is that we'll take whatever we can get. But God's going to give us his very best, even if we don't see it in the natural, even if we don't feel like, oh, this isn't what I had in mind for my life, right? God's end game for us is the end game, right? So let's go back to 1 Samuel chapter 1. And I want to start again with verse 11. I know I already read it, but I want to explain it now. So let me read it again. So 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 11. And she made a vow saying, O Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. So during this time and before this time, there was this thing called the Nazarite vow. All right. And the Nazarite vow was essentially the Old Testament way of becoming more than, not even, I don't want to say more than a priest, but it was, you would become essentially like live a monk life. That was the Nazarite vow. It was almost like you were going to live like a nun or like a monk. And so the idea was, she's saying here, if you just give me a son, Lord, then I will give him right back to you, and I will commit him to becoming a Nazarene for the rest of his life. Now, at this time, it was really like the Nazarene vow was something you would do for, you know, like an extended amount of time, but it was like a short extended amount of time. It wasn't something that you committed to doing forever necessarily. Part of it was that you were never allowed to cut your hair, right? No razor will ever be used on his head. But there was other things you had to do as well. I don't remember off the top of my head right now. I don't even remember what book they talk about it in, but the idea was that you essentially were going to live a life of seclusion. You had the highest standards on you as far as the food you ate, the things that you did. You spent your time devoted to the Lord, seeking the Lord, right? Learning about the Lord. And so it really was this very unusual lifestyle for people back then, just as it is now. It's an unusual lifestyle, you know, the monk life or the nun life, right? And so
She is making a promise. Remember, before this, in bitterness of soul, Hannah wept much and prayed to the Lord. So she's at the temple. Eli is watching her. He's sitting on a chair by the doorpost of the Lord's temple. Hannah's crying in bitterness of soul, and she's praying this prayer, right? And almost everyone can see her. She's in public at the tabernacle. So she's praying this prayer, and she's saying, God, I'm making this promise to you. Now, you have to be careful. Hannah meant it, and so she was smart to make this promise. But you have to mean it. You have to be careful what you promise God. You know, you can't just make these willy-nilly promises, so to speak. You have to mean it, what you say. Let's keep going. Verse 12. As she kept on praying to the Lord, Eli, remember Eli, he's the high priest there. Remember him and his 2 sons are serving there, right? Eli is watching her mouth. It says Eli observed her mouth. Verse 13. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk and said to her, how long will you keep on getting drunk? Get rid of your wine. Now, this is frustrating because Hannah is putting herself in this space where she's desperate. She's doing everything. And, would have ran out of there and just said, I'm never going to church again. This was the worst idea ever. I knew this wasn't going to work. I would have had a very bad attitude about this. But Hannah replies, check this out, verse 15. Not so, my Lord, Hannah replied. I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief. She's so faithful in her surrender. I mean, I don't, these past few weeks, I've been struggling so much. I just feel like, and I was talking to a friend of mine at work today. Shout out to Patty Thames. I was talking to a friend of mine at work today, and she was talking to me about spiritual warfare. And, it's just crazy because so many people that I know of are in it, are really in it. Like, not just a little bit, are really in it. Like, are at their wits' end with life, and it's just, everyone is struggling so much. It's so hard. Sometimes I look around and I wouldn't consider myself necessarily someone that, I don't go around seeing in the spirit realm all the time. I mean, I want to, trust me, I want to. And I've been praying for the Holy Spirit to minister to me and to show me things in the spirit realm and to speak to me through my dreams. I feel like God does speak to me through my dreams a lot, ever since I was a kid. But hearing her story, and then a lot of my other friends at work, and then family members, I see so much brokenness. And I see someone like Hannah, and I feel like anyone could relate to her story. I know not everyone's struggling with infertility per se, but I mean, there's just so much chaos out there. The world is it's such a mess. And as a teacher, I see and I hear the most atrocious things, you all. God, don't let it be your kids. But I cannot tell you, the public school system, it's a tough place. It's a tough place for these kids to be raised in. And this world, it's not my grandparents' world. It's different. It's different, and it's hard. There's so much coming at us. So when I see someone like Hannah that's just willing to pour herself out She's got nothing left to lose, I think. And I think that's why she's able to stick it out to this point. Because like I said, I think I would have gotten discouraged and just left the church. I would have just fled and walked away and just thought, forget it. Like, what is the point? But not Hannah. I think that she is so like on empty. She literally is at zero, that she's like, I cannot leave. I've got to get what I came for. And so I love that she has the boldness to reply to the priest and say, that's not true. I'm not drunk. I'm really deeply troubled right now. I mean, that takes a lot to admit to someone, to admit to another person of faith, to admit that you're not perfect, to admit that you're going through something, but even more so than to say, I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. I mean, and then I think about that and I think, when was the last time I poured out my soul to the Lord? I actually know when that was. It was recent, but I mean, honestly, shouldn't we be doing that, every day? Shouldn't we be pouring ourselves out to the Lord every day? But anyways, verse 16 again. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief. In her worst moment, she's using it to empower her prayers. I mean, that is powerful. When you can use your grief and your anguish, when you can use your despair to empower your prayer, to empower your crying out to the Lord, to empower your intimacy with him. I mean, that is something to be admired. Verse 17, Eli answered, go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him. So verse 18, check this out. Something interesting happens here, I think. She said, may your servant find favor in your eyes. Then she went her way and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. This is truly special to me. This is actually something that I've been sharing with friends and family lately, because I think it's absolutely true. But here, when she says that, because she's talking to Eli, she's responding to him, because he finally gets it. He's like, oh, okay, she's not drunk, right? And he says, okay, go ahead and go, my child, go in peace. May God grant you what you have asked of him. And then she says, may your servant find favor in your eyes. Like she's talking to God. Then she went her way. Look, this is what it says. Then she went her way and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. So here's what I get from this. She changed her attitude. Prayer changed her attitude, not her circumstance. This is really important. A lot of times, I have a friend that will come to me and that will say, I'm praying and it's not working. I don't feel better, And how many of us can relate to that? I mean, I pray during my darkest moments, hoping that it'll make me feel better. And I'm like, what the heck, God? Where are you? Why haven't you shown up? But this right here has been such a game changer for me because of what I've learned from Hannah. When you pray, that doesn't change God's will or God's plan for your life. It doesn't change God at all. It's not like he was mad before or he was against you before. And so let me say a prayer. Oh, okay. And now he's going to change his mind and suddenly do whatever it is that you want him to do. No, God doesn't change when you pray. Prayer is not about changing God. Prayer is about changing you. Let's keep going. Verse 19. Early the next morning, they arose and worshipped before the Lord, and then went back to their home at Ramah. Elkanah lay with Hannah, his wife, and the Lord remembered her. Verse 20. So in the course of time, Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, saying, because I asked the Lord for him. And Samuel sounds like the Hebrew for heard of God.
So let's keep going. Verse 21. And here for the subtitle, it says Hannah dedicates Samuel. So she got a son, which is glorious. I mean, it's crazy to think about how God can take your pain and literally turn it into his glory, but I mean, it's hard to see that. It's hard to see that with the natural eye when you're in the storm, but that's what faith is. We talk about this in previous videos, but that's what faith is. Faith is that inner confidence that God is going to do what he says he's going to do. You believing that in your heart, not just saying it with your mouth. Anyone can make proclamations, but you believing it in your heart, regardless of how you feel, regardless of what you see and what you hear, knowing that God is going to show up and he's going to do it. So verse 21, when the man Elkanah went up with all his family to offer the annual sacrifice to the Lord and to fulfill his vow, 22, Hannah did not go. She said to her husband, after the boy is weaned, I will take him and present him before the Lord, and he will live there always. Now, remember, they don't live in Shiloh. So for Hannah to have made that promise, she's saying that from a young age, this boy is not going to grow up near her. This boy that she's been praying for, this child that she's been praying for this whole time. And it says here that she told her husband after the boy is weaned. I remember when I was reading this the first time, 1 Samuel, and I got to this point, I wanted to know how long that was. Because, I, as someone who doesn't have kids, I was thinking, is it a few months? No, it's not a few months, right? I mean, now I have a niece and a nephew, and I feel like when I think of weaning, I think when you're fully weaned off, it's got to be like 2-3 years old, I would think, 3. But even then, like, I would think, I mean, it doesn't mean literally weaned off, like they don't need their mother for food anymore. Or does it mean emotionally also? Maybe, there's some interpretations that think that maybe he was closer to 5 or 6. I mean, that would be, easier. It's so hard for me though. Like I almost get teary-eyed thinking about my nephew he's 4 years old right now. He just turned 4 in November, so a few months ago. And it saddens me to think that he couldn't be with his mom starting like now, that he would be taken and, that's it. And, this past weekend, my brother and his daughter and son, my niece and nephew, who are 4 and 3, they came to stay with us for the weekend. And my sister-in-law stayed back home, in another city 4 hours away. And so they were here they got here Friday, they were here Saturday, Sunday, left Monday morning. And my brother told us each morning that they were crying for their mom, every night before they went to bed. For the most part during the day, I think they were distracted because me and my mother were playing games with them nonstop and just showing them a good time, But at nighttime, when things settled down, I guess my brother would call or FaceTime so that the children could say goodnight to their mom, and, they would get upset. And it irks me to think that a child would be without their mom at such a young age, you know? So I see this and it makes me a little sad, but I mean, I get it. Like she made that vow, right? And it produced the results she wanted, but she did make that vow, right? And so God's going to hold her to it, and she's holding herself to it, right? She's the one. It's not like she said, you know, hey, I'm going to try and keep him. Like, don't tell anyone. Like, I'm going to try and keep this boy with me as long as possible. No, she is honest with her husband and says, hey, like, I'm going to have him until he is weaned, and then I'll take him and present him before the Lord, and he's going to live there always. I mean, it literally says, and he will live there always. Verse 23, do what seems best to you, Elkanah, her husband, told her. Stay here until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord make good his word. So the woman stayed at home and nursed her son until she had weaned him. Verse 24, after he was weaned, she took the boy with her, young as he was, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. Verse 25, when they had slaughtered the bull, they brought the boy to Eli and said to him, as surely as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. Verse 27, I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him. And finally, verse 28, so now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord. And he worshiped the Lord there. I want to go back a little bit here. Let's go back to verse 24. After he was weaned, she took the boy with her, young as he was. So we know he was young. This wasn't a teenager, right? Along with the 3-year-old bull, right? So she took all the necessary things as an offering to the Lord at Shiloh. And when they had slaughtered the bull, they brought the boy to Eli. And she said to Eli, as surely as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you. So she's saying, you remember me, right? I was the woman that you thought was drunk. And then I told you, no, I'm not drunk. I'm pouring out my heart before God and asking for a son. And then she tells Eli, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him. So she's revealing to Eli, hey, do you remember me? I'm that chick, and I got what I wanted. God did give me, he did answer my prayer, right? And then verse 28, and this to me is something. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord, and he worshiped the Lord there. Samuel had to be between 3 and 5 years old at this time when he was relocated. And Samuel honors his mother and father without hesitation, without complaints or protests, as far as we can see here. You know, what a sacrifice on all parts of this family. How difficult, and yet it doesn't seem so. It seems like everyone just kind of falls in line and does what they know is part of God's plan, especially since it was something, again, that was promised to God by Hannah in order to even get a chance at having Samuel, at having a son. And then we see in chapter 2 that her next step is to rejoice, is to give praise. She got her prayer answered, had the child, had Samuel, had him for just 3, maybe 4, at most 5 years old. Then she sends him off to where he is going to be living not with her for, she says it herself, for always, that he's going to be over there for always. And then her next step immediately after that isn't to go to her bedroom and wallow in her tears and Ben and Jerry's ice cream, but is instead she says a prayer. She says a prayer of heartfelt gratitude. Chapter 2, verse 1, we'll just open with it. Then Hannah prayed and said, my heart rejoices in the Lord. In the Lord, my horn is lifted high. My mouth boasts over my enemies, for I delight in your deliverance. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one beside you. There is no rock like our God. Do not keep talking so proudly, or let your mouth speak such arrogance. For the Lord is a God who knows, and by him deeds are weighed. Verse 4, the bows of the warriors are broken, but those who stumbled are armed with strength. Those who were full hired themselves out for food, but those who were hungry hunger no more. She who was barren, and I think she's talking about herself here, she who was barren has borne 7 children, but she who has had many sons pines away. So she's using a metaphor here, but those who were hungry hunger no more, right? So if you're living a life where you're constantly feeding yourself with all these distractions and all of the luxuries and comforts of life, then God doesn't need to help you. That's the theme of today's study, is that you cannot fix something that's not broken. That's the saying. Don't fix something if it's not broken, right? But I believe that God is looking for the broken people so that he can fix them, because that's where he gets glory. That's when he can work. That's when he works the best. I don't know it off the top of my head, but the Bible verse doesn't say I'm strong when you're strong. It says when you're weak, I'm strong, right? So she's saying she who was barren, talking about herself, has borne 7 children, but she who has had many sons pines away. Verse 6, the Lord brings death and makes alive. He brings down to the grave and raises up. 7, the Lord sends poverty and wealth. He humbles and he exalts. 8, he raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap. Sets them with princes and has them inherit a throne of honor. For the foundations of the earth are the Lord's. Upon them he has set the world. 9, he will guard the feet of his saints, but the wicked will be silenced in darkness. It is not by strength that one prevails. And that is the key right there to Hannah's story. That is the key to her answered prayer. It is not by strength that one prevails. You don't become an overcomer by your own doing, by your own deeds, by your own good works, by your own completed task list, right? By your own strength. It says it is not by strength that one prevails. Verse 10, those who oppose the Lord will be shattered. He will thunder against them from heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. There's a reference to what we've been talking about, that the Lord is judge. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. Verse 11, then Elkanah went home to Ramah, but the boy ministered before the Lord under Eli the priest. So Elkanah went home, right? They lived originally. I know they traveled to Shiloh a lot in this chapter, but Elkanah and his family, both Peninnah, right, his second wife with all of her children, and then now Hannah, they are from Ramah. That's where they live, right? But it says, but the boy ministered before the Lord under Eli the priest. So he stayed behind and he became the mentee to Eli, his mentor, and learned under Eli's priesthood, basically. And we're going to stop there. I wanted to leave off with some reflective questions. When was the last time that you felt truly broken in front of God? And not just broken in the sense that you were crying and, or just really in despair, or you felt like you were in the middle of a storm, so to speak. But when were you broken like Hannah, to the point where, okay, I cannot handle this anymore. I just need to surrender and pour out my heart to God, and to the point where you gave it to God, where you actually surrendered. Because, anyone can cry out to God during a difficult moment. And in fact, most people will cry out to God at some point in their life, especially when they're desperate enough. When I was a teenager, I remember seeing comic strip cartoon image of an atheist in the hospital on their deathbed, and in their final, like, last words that they had, they were asking God for help, which was supposed to be the ironic, funny part, that even an atheist would cry out to God. And so I say that as, it takes something different, and it takes something more to then surrender to God. A lot of people will cry and ask the Lord for help or go to him as Father, but it's different when you are surrendering the things that are hurting you, or the things that you struggle with personally in your life. So I would just challenge you today to think about that as we finish off this particular study, and as you go home, or as you pray tonight, or as you wake up tomorrow, think about how you can go to God during your desperate moment, and like Hannah, make more of a surrender and a commitment to him, and offer something to him that is more than just your tears, and see if even maybe challenge God to give something back, not necessarily a trade, but maybe go into that surrender with an expectation from him. I think a lot of times we don't have enough expectations. We think that maybe God doesn't notice us, or that what we want or what we need, even when it aligns with God's will, we think that it doesn't matter to him, or that he's too busy, but that's just simply not true. And so I would challenge you to find a moment, a space where you can be broken and be desperate, and get into that powerful space like Hannah did. And like we learned about the woman that was begging for crumbs off of her master's table, find yourself in that space. And then the deeper challenge is then to go into it with the expectation that God is going to do something, that God is going to move, that God is going to answer your prayer, like Hannah believed, and like the woman that was begging for crumbs, that she would take anything.
Well, that's all we have time for today. I hope you enjoyed studying with me, and if you did, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also, don't be a stranger. Leave a comment. Until next time, don't forget to pick up your Bible.